Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. Looking you up on IMDb, you have 65 credits to your name already. How? Like, that's so impressive. How do you make these connections with these filmmakers, and when do you sleep? I'm just so curious.
I don't know. When do you start? I tried to cover these up. Um, so I went to school at NYU for my master's degree in music composition. And at the time that I went to school there, I also met a ton of filmmakers at Tisch and Columbia and all, different film schools in New York. And I just tried to work with as many people as possible. And as we've progressed farther and farther into our careers, our relationships have stayed strong. And then, one thing leads to another, leads to another. So I've been really grateful to experience what you hear about in this industry, which is just word of mouth, and you never know who's going to lead to what and how. And it's just kind of been a pretty natural unfolding for it all.
Well, and I can imagine too, going to Sundance in, was it 2018 with The Tale?
Yeah.
That must have been just like a great experience. Can you talk about that a little bit? Just being, at Sundance on the ground floor in Park City.
Right, I know this year was really different in that regard. Yeah, it was magical. I mean, it's anyone who goes through their first time, it's a puzzle to navigate at first. It's kind of a microcosm, I think, of how this industry works in terms of you never know who you'll meet on the street, in a restaurant, in line, and so I made a lot of really great friendships just from that year. But I think Sundance did an amazing job this year. This is my third Sundance. Um, they've done a great job this year of creating that community effect in as best as we can, with lots of Zooms and lots of meetups. And the new frontier was really cool. And I don't know if you
Mhm.
got a chance to
I
walk
with
around
the
as an
heads.
avatar. Yeah,
Yeah.
we had our little our after party there, and it was great. And so you get some of that experience of just bumping into someone, but of course it's different, and hopefully it'll be back in Park City next year.
I know, right? That would, yeah. I'm hopeful and optimistic that I think it will. So
Yeah, me
we will
too.
see. I went to a Catholic school
Oh, wow.
third through eighth grade, and I never really saw the nuns as human beings up until this film. I just always saw them as these authoritarian figures.
That was one of the parts of the movie that struck me most. Was there's a young girl, I don't know how old she was, but in her young teens, she was being interviewed, and they asked, what difference does it make to see them in a habit versus not in a habit? And she said, well, we can see them as real people
Mm.
when they don't have their habits on. So that really struck with me, of these are multifaceted, strong, independent women, who happen to be sometimes in a habit. And it really did change my perspective too, just from my kind of pop culture information on what nuns are.
Yeah, well, and I think it did for a lot of people. I mean, if it affected, the both of us, I'm sure it affected so many more people too, which is awesome.
Me too.
So there was one song in particular, what was it? Genesis of Resistance, that I really loved in Rebel Hearts. And it had this, I think it was pitched as like a traditional and experimental sound combined into one. And it kind of interpreted as an awakening of the nuns' freedoms. Like they have
Yeah.
been, yeah, told that like they were a flock mentality, but as we see in the film, they start to discover that they have a voice and they are going to use it and use it for what they think is right. And so I'm curious, where as a composer, where does your desire for this experimentation come from?
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, that piece was, I think, one of the first in the first round of cues that I sent off when I just started the project. And the prompt for that was to really embody the spirit of experimentation and pushing boundaries, while also with a great love of what they were doing. It wasn't pure, I mean, it was rebellion, but there was still a joy in it, of wanting to just wanting to have more independence, and wanting to focus the lens on social justice, and to be seen as people. In that piece, there's a combination of classical instrumentation and some electronics, and then some very playful articulations on classical instruments. So perhaps it's a little more liberating, it's a little more playful, it's a little more textural. It was a really beautiful to get to articulate their experimentalism in my own experimentalism.
Mhm.
So that, yeah, I'm glad you responded to that piece, and that's how I approached their palette in general.
Right. Well, and that song and that cue in particular tells its own story. And I think a lot of composers are these sonic storytellers, because without the sound and you're just watching an image, you can interpret it many different ways. But I think with
Right.
sound, it encourages you to think about something a different way. And I'm curious if you would consider yourself a storyteller.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think the reason I love working with film so much is because of, well, I'm not just a recording artist, is because I love the collaboration of telling a story and telling a meaningful story in whatever way it's told. And so absolutely, I mean, any piece of music can work with any piece of film. It's just a matter of what it says and what it evokes in you. And so you hold a lot of power, and it's a huge responsibility as a composer, to nail that tone. And with that specific part in the film, this was just the beginning of them feeling extremely excited about this new evolution of their religion and their community, and how they looked at themselves and their purpose.
Yeah, and that totally comes through. I
Thank
very
you.
much felt that.
Thank
Did
you.
you start working on this project in 2020, or was this something that was in previous years?
Yeah, in 2020,
Okay.
2020. I think I came on just after Thanksgiving. So it
Okay.
was, yeah, so it was a quick turnaround, but it was, it really came easy because I mean, I would get emotionally caught up so quickly, so intensely, with these stories. And I became so attached to these sisters, and seeing some of them at the talk back at Sundance,
Mm.
in real time was really moving for me. And later in a Zoom meeting we all had, there were, members from the Immaculate Heart community there, and it was just a month and change of being completely immersed and in love with this story. And I know so many people in LA who grew up in LA or have been in LA for many years and haven't known anything about this story.
Yeah, well, that's me. I'm born and raised here,
Yeah,
and I went to Catholic school, and I didn't know.
right.
That's what's so fascinating about this film, and I'm trying to get, yeah, everyone that I know and went to school with to see it, to be like, look, this is like, the sisters are cool. They're not
Yeah.
these scary people. They're like, they care, and they're unique, and they're artists, and they're, yeah, strong,
Well,
independent women.
yeah, and I think that what really struck me, a point in the film was made, that this perception of, the kind of a rigid or mean, nun, perhaps was a byproduct of them being given so little resources to do their task of teaching
Right.
80 children in the classroom, of having no formal education on how to educate.
Right.
um, you start to understand the system which created that, that sense. So few people are as devoted as they are to put their bodies on the line for what they believe in, and their livelihood for what they believe in. So it really really makes you ask yourself, how much would I give up, for something that I believe in? And they gave up
Right.
everything. It just blew me away. And I think everyone who watches it is a bit humbled, and they ask themselves, would they be that brave?
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
great word, humbled. That definitely, that I agree. So that's so fascinating that you created the score in a month and change. That's
It
mind
was a
blowing.
fast one.
Yeah. How, with every process and every new film that you take on, do you have the same kind of physical and or mental start to a film, or has things kind of shifted a little bit since quarantine and, you know,
Yeah, well,
limitations?
the quarantine, aspect of it really hasn't changed much for me. I mean, I'm in my studio alone. I generally, like, the composing process is very solitary to begin
Mm.
with. And the biggest thing is, all recording is remote. So it's, you're not going to a stage and conducting a large group of musicians. A lot of it is all of it was remote. I was just on a conversation last night with a bunch of musicians and composers about the wild west of remote recording, and how, it is here to stay. And there certainly, we will get back to sound stages with in-person recording sessions, but remote recording is, it's a skill, and it's an important and valuable aspect to know how to do. So this year, I mean, everyone's learned how to do it. All musicians who wanted to have a fighting chance to make money this year do have their own remote setups now. So it's great. You can just kind of call on anyone. Hey, can you record 5 minutes, 5 minutes of music on this or that? And kind of the world is open to you now. Of course, it never replaces being in the room and collaborating with a musician person to person.
So this is a question that I like to ask every composer and or musician. Do you see yourself as one or the other, like a composer or a musician, or both?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say I'm both a composer and multi-instrumentalist, but the musicians that we record with or that we hire are practicing 7-8 hours a day. I mean, this is their entire life. And when you're a composer, even if you have a history of playing instruments, and I play lots of instruments, you're not devoting and putting the blood, sweat of tears into only that funnel. And so it becomes more about the creativity of not only your instrument, but you're also working with picture and working with a director. And so it's a different skill set, and it's just a matter of focus. And I think we can all be both, and it's just a matter of where we focus most of our energy. I play on my own scores all the time, but I also love bringing in fresh voices because it inspires me.
Right. Awesome. Last question.
Okay.
You put out an album, correct? Like last year?
I did.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So it's called Luthier, and it's based on my complete adoration and obsession with stringed instruments, bowed string instruments. And I recorded with a string quintet in Macedonia, with Fame's recording. And the album is inspired by acoustic physics and luthery itself. So the concepts of and techniques of making a violin or a cello or a stringed instrument. Plucked or bowed. I play on it on some tracks, but mainly it's the quintet. And it was a prompt for myself to explore lots of different techniques on the strings, lots of different moods, lots of different ways of orchestrating in a small ensemble. So it's a really gorgeous, intense sound when you have 5 musicians together versus an orchestra, a string orchestra. It's the real intensity of having 5 solo voices in a room it's very vulnerable and close and intense sound, and I love it. That led me to Rebel Hearts. So it's yeah, exactly. And so the director Pedro really responded to the album, and then we worked. The rest is history. Tracy put me in front of him and shared my music, and we really connected. So yeah, I mean composers sometimes are so busy with writing for film or TV that they don't have time to write solo albums that are just coming from their heart, not prompted from a certain project. And I'm really, really glad I took the time to do this, because it's another way to have another facet of you out there. Putting out an album of music that you want to be hired for and for people to resonate was the greatest way I could have spent last year doing.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's so inspiring. Well, congratulations. This was so great. Thank you so much for talking with me. Yeah, I absolutely loved the film, and hopefully I'll see you at Sundance next year or in a couple years.
I know. I hope so too. Thank you.
Yeah, so great talking to you, and thank you so much.
You too. Thanks.
All right. Bye.